Hello and welcome to this presentation on the question that you can see in front of you with regards to the History Boys. How far does Alan Bennett present Irwin as an unlikable character in the History Boys? This question was taken from the June 2019 series, so it's the most recent set of exams done, and on the face of it looks to be quite a kind question. This short video will demonstrate some of the thinking that goes into it, but also leave you with the opportunity to make some improvements as well. So the first thing you do is try and write down your gut instinct which answers the question. Do you like Mr. Irwin or not? Do you find him likeable? And to my mind this all comes down to what kind of teacher you want to be and what you want your teachers to be. Some students will want teachers to stand there and tell them things. Other students will value teachers who make the lessons fun, and therefore it depends what teacher you like, and we can see that there are different teachers in the text which embody those different types of trait, and ultimately what I'm looking to do is have that discussion on the page. So the first thing I do is try and write the ideas down. Some of those are here. So Mr. Irwin, perhaps a likeable character if you want your teacher to help you pass the test. He's very, very good at that because he requires the students to manipulate the knowledge that they have to perform for the exam. And with that comes a kind of respect that the students have for him. The question is whether that's what we want education to be. And you'll know over the last couple of years I've used the phrase beef. What's Alan Bennett's beef? And Alan Bennett's beef with regards to Mr. Irwin is that he's a very successful teacher in terms of getting high performance out of his students, but he raises the question as to whether that's what you should have teachers be. So again, I'm kind of going around in circles a little bit because I'm coming back to the same point over and over again. So what I did in preparation for this was write an introduction, one which on the face of it looks quite strong, but I think has some flaws with it as well. I'm going to go through what they are in a second. Here's the introduction, and you'll see that I've written it by hand, and I've written it by hand because that's what you're going to have to do as well. Hopefully it's readable. It says, whether we like Irwin is entirely dependent on what we want a teacher to be. If we want a teacher who promotes the manipulation of knowledge to pass a test, then Irwin is likeable. If we want a teacher who values factual knowledge, then perhaps Mrs. Lintott is likeable. If we want a teacher who values knowledge for its own sake, then Hector is likeable. If anything, Irwin is likeable because he enables the boys to succeed in their aim of getting to Oxbridge, and for most, that is enough. Being likeable is almost an irrelevance for the boys, if not for Bennett. For Bennett, for the playwright, Irwin is broadly speaking an objectionable character due to his lack of principle. Now, if a student produces this in an exam scenario under the pressure that brings with time constraints, then we're going to be reasonably happy, I think. Probably very happy. However, there are some issues, let's call them that, issues to iron out, as well as positives to be happy with. Let's start with the positives, and I'm going to use a red pen to sort of pick those out. The first thing that I've done is use the keyword in the question a number of times. Whether we like Irwin is entirely dependent on what we want a teacher to be. If we want a teacher who promotes the manipulation of knowledge to pass a test, then Irwin is likeable. Seems I can't draw a nice red line. But the reason I put a nice red line there is because if I stop here, I've got myself a very functional but still strong, still a good introduction because it answers the question and it sets up a debate that I can then have in the rest of the writing. The next couple of lines are designed to sort of promote a kind of contrast. If we want a teacher who values factual knowledge, then perhaps Mrs. Lintott is likeable. That's true, there's no evidence for it yet, but it kind of sets up that I can talk about Mrs. Lintott later on, and I direct the teacher, the examiner, to where my essay is going. and that inspires a kind of confidence in them. The same for the next sentence. If we want a teacher who values knowledge for its own sake, then Hector is likeable. So again, I'm now signposting to the person reading my work that I'm going to have a section on Hector and whether he's likeable. The problem, however, with those two sentences is that I'm potentially diverging too far away from the question, which is about Mr. Irwin. If I return you to that question, how far does Bennett present Irwin as an unlikable figure? It doesn't ask about Hector, it doesn't ask about Mrs. Lintott. So I need to ensure that even though I may want to mention the other characters, Irwin does remain the focus. So it helps me to realign my thinking to say, well, Irwin may be likeable in some way. He helps them pass the test. He may not be likeable in other ways. I need to provide some evidence of that later on in my writing. But all of that is in contrast to the other characters. And then that comes down to our own personal response. Personally, I probably want a teacher who's a little bit of all three. I want a teacher who can help me pass a test. I want a teacher who ensures I've got the kind of strong core factual knowledge that enables me to show that I actually know something. But then I also value knowledge for its own sake. Perhaps this matters depending on what year you're in. If you're doing exams one particular year, then perhaps you want a Mrs. Lintott, Mr. Irwin type teacher. Anyway, if I return to the paragraph that I've written, and I'll pick it up here. If anything, Irwin is likeable because he enables the boys to succeed in their aim of getting to Oxbridge, and for most, that is enough. Now again, I put a line there because I feel that if I stop there, I've got myself a slightly stronger introductory paragraph which demonstrates to the examiner, well, I'm answering the question, it's about Irwin. I've used the word likeable an awful lot, which is helpful. Here we are, let's just pick out a few of the examples I can see without having to look too hard. All of those demonstrate I'm answering the question, which is essential. But I've got my line here also because I feel that the next section is just diverging a little bit too far from the question. And therefore what I probably need to do is demonstrate to you that if I were to do this and cross that bit out, albeit very faintly, then I've got myself a section of writing which is all about the question. Perhaps I should explain what's wrong with this. Being likeable is almost an irrelevance. Is that true? I'm not sure that it is. It sounds quite nice, but I don't think it's true. Students do, and the boys do, the boys in the text that is, they do like some teachers more than others. At the beginning of the text they appear to like Mr. Hector and his lessons. They at least go along with it, and by the end of the text they appear to have sort of shunned that style and gone to Irwin's more tokenistic approach. Why? Because they want to pass their test. So maybe being likeable, maybe it's not quite irrelevant, but I haven't worded it well enough to, I think, leave it there. For the playwright, Irwin is broadly speaking. Ooh, what a horrible phrase I wrote there. Broadly speaking, it sounds an awful lot like I'm about to generalise. And if I generalise, then I'm making a point which is obviously not strong enough. It's like the equivalent of me saying that all people from Essex are dimwits. Well, given I was born in Essex, that's why I used that example, and I'd like to think it wasn't true, but you know, to generalise is generally shocking English, wasn't it? But it's usually not necessarily a sign of knowledge. It's a sign of somebody guessing. So up until this point, this moment here, where I've got my red line, I think I've got like a pretty strong opening paragraph because I've answered the question. The clue being all of these nice keywords that I'm taking from the task itself, and I'm just signposting to the examiner where I'm going to go in my essay. I'm going to write about Mr. Irwin, I'm going to write about Mrs. Lintott, I'm going to write about Mr. Hector, and that gives me a chance to go off and explore the text. So for the purposes of my planning, I can then do the following. Irwin, Mrs. Lintott, Hector, and at this stage all I want to do is just, as I've done at the top of the page, I'll show you that, get some ideas down so that I don't forget them. Now I want to get some ideas down so that I don't forget them once more. Well, what are my ideas about Irwin? In what way is he likeable? The quotation, well, that's what I want to do. Is I don't want to have to work too hard. What's the quotation that comes instantly to mind? The 14 foreskins of Jesus Christ. I know that I can talk about how that seems to embody Irwin's sort of approach. He doesn't really care what you know. It's remembering the useless bits of information, perhaps the trivial, the remarkable, the stuff that's going to stand out and be memorable. That's what he wants his students to do, to promote the memorable, the performative kind of quotation. Then what does Mrs. Lintott sort of seem to embody? Now, I can either pick a completely different quotation, something about facts which demonstrates her knowledge, or if I'm feeling particularly clever, I might be able to sort of tie it into the quotation above. And all the while I was talking there, I was giving myself a chance to think as well. She refers to the teaching of Mr. Irwin as the equivalent of the sprig of parsley. It's an umbrella in your drink. It's not factual knowledge. It's, you know, like a sprig of parsley on your dinner. It doesn't add any flavour. It doesn't add any sort of texture. It's supposedly there to make things look pretty, but most people just take the bit of parsley off of the dinner and leave it on the side of the plate. So she's essentially saying that that kind of knowledge is useless. And again, that ties back into whether we consider that to be a likeable trait or not. What do we want our teacher to be? So I'm coming back to the beginning of my text once more. And then Hector, well, in what way is he likeable? I think there are lots of examples here. But I'm going to go to the French scene, and I'm going to go to the French scene because I think it's probably the funniest scene in the text. It demonstrates the ways in which Hector is a likeable character and how the boys like him. The head teacher has just walked in with Dakin not wearing trousers, and by rights everyone should be in a great amount of trouble. But Hector doesn't get into trouble because the boys sort of vouch for him. They go along with the story that it isn't a brothel, and there's a good reason why he's got no trousers on, which is that they're reenacting World War One in Ypres, in Belgium, and it's a really fantastic demonstration of the boys and their sort of respect for Hector at that stage. The other thing that it enables me to do is to explicitly discuss Alan Bennett's method, how we have this scene of farce, how there is this visual humour in the text, how they're speaking French and it's reliant, the whole scene is reliant in many respects on the audience understanding French. These are things that Alan Bennett does on purpose, and because he does them on purpose, that constitutes a method. Method being anything that the writer does on purpose. So your task from here would be, and I'll write the instructions out for you. Can't spell. Write your own introduction. Then use the quotations provided to continue the essay. Those quotations provided being these ones here. Hopefully that sets you off on the right note and gives you a chance to show off all that you know about the text. Good luck.